In this example problem, we're going to be preparing production costing reports for Vivid Creations. Vivid makes crayons, and they do so in a two-step process. Firstly, all the ingredients necessary to make the wax are put together in the mixing department, and then after the wax is properly molded or mixed up and ready to go, it is transferred off to the molding department to be molded into the shape of crayons. We're going to start with the first department in this production chain, which is the mixing department, and we have the following information to work with. During the period, Vivid Creations had 1,000 crayons worth of mixture being made when the period started. To that, they've already committed $20,000 in direct material costs and $25,000 in conversion costs, combined labor and overhead. During the period, they started production of enough to make another 5,000 batches of crayons. And during the period, they completed and transferred out 4,000 batches of crayons, leaving them with 2,000 batches worth of crayon mixture in the mixing department's ending whip. Not all the way done yet, still working on it when the period ended. During the period, the mixing department spent a total of $80,000 on materials and $81,600 on conversion costs. The batches which were in our beginning whip were already done 100% for materials. They're only half done, 50% in terms of conversion costs. So all the materials were there, but they still needed to run through the machines to be mixed up, etc. The units in ending whip are also 100% done for direct materials, and those units are 80% done for conversion costs. So they're a little closer to being done, but they're still not all the way mixed. We need to make a PCR, a production cost report, for this mixing department to figure out what portion of all of the costs that went through this department are going to get transferred off to the second phase of production, the molding department, and what portion are going to stay here in this department's ending whip. But the difference here is that Vivid Creations, instead of being an AVCO company for the process costing technique, they're going to be a FIFO company, which means they're going to assume that all of the units they have in beginning whip are going to get transferred off for production before any units that got started during the period get transferred. And because costs differentiate from period to period, we have to isolate out the cost of units that were in beginning whip from the units that we actually worked on during the period, because they might not have been manufactured at the same cost. So we're going to start the same way that we always do, with our physical units that we have. How many units were in the beginning whip of the mixing department? Well, it's given in the information that there were 1,000 batches worth of crayons that were being worked on when the period began. And during the period, Vivid Creations started production of another 5,000 batches. So there's 1,000 here before the period started, and another 5,000 came in during the period. That is a total of 6,000 batches of crayon mixture that Vivid Creations has to account for. They have to figure out where these 6,000 batches ended up. Well, what can we account for over here? What got transferred out? Well, because we're a FIFO company, we're assuming that the 1,000 units that were in beginning whip are getting transferred first. They would have gone off to the molding department. We didn't just transfer 1,000 units to the molding department, we transferred a total of 4,000 units to the molding department. So, if we transferred 4,000 units to the second phase of production, and we're assuming that 1,000 of those were the units that were in beginning whip, that means the other 3,000 units that got transferred must have been started and completed the whole way through during this production process. And we ended up with 2,000 batches worth of crayons in our ending whip, and that sums up to a total of 6,000 batches worth of crayons that we have accounted for, and we know where they are. So we transferred out a total of 4,000 units, 1,000 from beginning whip, and 3,000 that were started and completed during the period, and the other 2,000 are in ending whip, but that's a total of 6,000. So one more time, how do you find the started and completed number? It's the total amount that you transferred out minus the amount that you had in your beginning whip. And now we need to convert this into equivalent units. It's just too hard to calculate when you have different levels of completion. So what you're going to say is, we'll do beginning whip first. For beginning whip, how many units could we have made start to finish for the cost that it took us to complete these units the part of the way that they needed to be completed? So For beginning WIP, what you're really looking for is not what was the beginning percentage, but how much did you have to add to that to get to 100% to complete those units that were in beginning WIP. And that formula right here is just physical units. I could type physical units times 1 minus the completion percentage for beginning WIP. So for direct materials, I'd fill in that formula. Our physical units is 1,000 times, in parentheses, 1 minus the completion percentage that was already completed for direct materials, which is 100%. Close that parenthesis. And I get a fat 0, which makes sense. They were done for direct materials when the period started, which means we wouldn't have to add any cost to them. An equivalent units is a measure of how many units you could have made for the cost that you added. Well, if we didn't add any cost, you couldn't make any units for that cost. So equivalent units here should be 0. What about over here for conversion costs? Same formula. We take our physical units, we multiply it by 1 minus the completion percentage that we started with was 50%. So they're half done. We had to finish them the other half of the way. And for the same amount of cost it took to finish these units half of the way, 1,000 units, we could have made 500 batches of crayons mixture from start to finish. So that's our equivalent units of production from beginning WIP for conversion costs. For started and completed, they started from scratch. There was nothing there. We finished them, which means every little bit of cost that had to go into these 3,000 batches of crayons right here went into them. An equivalent units is a measure of how many you could have made for that cost if you were making them from start to finish. Well, we were making them from start to finish, which means that for your started and completed row, it's always going to be the same thing as your physical units. Same as physical units, because they are, in fact, being made from start to finish. For our ending WIP, that's the same as AVCO. You take your physical units and you just multiply it by how complete they are, what percent they complete they are when the period ends. So the 2,000 units that we have in ending WIP are 100% done for their direct materials, which means our equivalent units is 2,000. To make 2,000, to put all the material costs into 2,000 units and have them be all done, it's going to be the same cost that 2,000 units would cost. Over here, for conversion costs, they're not all the way done. They're only 80% of the way done. So for the same amount of conversion costs, how many units could we have made the whole way for the same amount of money that it took us to make 2,000 units 80% of the way? And that is 1,600. And now I just sum up those numbers, and voila. Our equivalent units of production for direct materials is 5,000, and our equivalent units of production in terms of conversion costs is 5,100.